Rain arrived before the Duke did. It swept across the hills in long silver veils and rattled against the tall windows of Ashcombe House, turning the ancient estate into a blurred watercolor of stone, ivy, and mist. Inside, candlelight trembled along polished corridors while servants hurried through the evening like figures in a grand performance, each carrying flowers, silver trays, or armfuls of freshly pressed linen. News of the Duke of Blackthorne's arrival had transformed the household into a hive of anxious motion, for powerful men often brought powerful consequences. Among those moving quietly through the commotion was a young woman carrying a basket of white roses. She wore a simple dark gown suitable for household work, her sleeves neatly rolled, her posture modest enough to discourage notice. Most people passed her without a second glance. That invisibility had become both her shield and her burden. Her name within the house was Miss Eleanor Grey. Her true name was Lady Eleanor Ashcombe. Years earlier, scandal had swept through her family with the force of a winter storm. Documents had disappeared. Accusations had multiplied. Trusted relatives had turned into strangers. By the time the whispers ended, the rightful heiress of Ashcombe had vanished from society, leaving behind only rumor. Some believed she had married abroad. Others insisted she had died. The truth was far less dramatic and far more painful. She had remained where she had always belonged, living quietly within the walls of her own home while another branch of the family controlled its affairs. Eleanor reached the great entrance hall and began arranging roses in a crystal vase. The flowers glowed softly beneath the chandeliers. For a moment she allowed herself to admire them. Roses did not concern themselves with titles. They bloomed wherever they were planted. A sharp voice interrupted her thoughts. "The carriage has been sighted." The announcement rippled through the hall. Footmen straightened. Maids exchanged nervous glances. Even the butler adjusted his cuffs. Then the doors opened. Cold air swept inside first, followed by the imposing figure of the Duke of Blackthorne. Sebastian Fairfax, Duke of Blackthorne, carried himself with the effortless authority of a man accustomed to obedience. Rain darkened the shoulders of his coat. His expression revealed little, yet there was something weary beneath his composure, as though responsibility had become a weight he no longer bothered to conceal. Society admired him for his title, his fortune, and his discipline. Society also feared him for the same reasons. Eleanor lowered her gaze and continued working. The Duke stepped forward while servants gathered to receive him. Without pausing to study the faces around him, he removed a pair of gloves and placed them into Eleanor's hands. "You there," he said. The words were calm, neither cruel nor kind. "Kindly fetch the lady of the house. I have no wish to discuss family matters with servants." Silence followed. Several guests standing nearby heard every word. Then came laughter. Not loud laughter. Not honest laughter. The restrained amusement of people delighted by another person's humiliation. Heat rose to Eleanor's cheeks. For one reckless heartbeat she imagined lifting her head and announcing exactly who she was. She imagined the shock, the apologies, the embarrassment. Instead she curtsied. "As you wish, your grace." The Duke had already turned away. The dismissal stung more than the insult. He had not merely mistaken her for a servant. He had considered her so insignificant that her face was scarcely worth noticing. The evening unfolded around that wound. Guests filled the drawing rooms. Musicians performed beneath glittering chandeliers. Conversations drifted through the estate like invisible currents. Eleanor carried out her responsibilities with practiced grace, ensuring every arrangement remained flawless. Yet fragments of the earlier exchange followed her everywhere. Poor girl. Did you see it? The Duke never even looked at her. By midnight, the humiliation had become a story. Eleanor stood alone for a brief moment beside a window overlooking the rain-soaked gardens. Reflections shimmered across the glass. She barely recognized the woman staring back. "Do not let them see it." The voice belonged to Mrs. Whitmore, the elderly housekeeper who had known Eleanor since childhood. Eleanor offered a faint smile. "See what?" That it hurt. The older woman's gaze softened. "They are not worth the satisfaction." Eleanor nodded, though the ache remained. Across the room, the Duke happened to glance toward the window. For the first time that evening, he truly noticed her. Not her gown. Not her roll. Something in her expression caught his attention. It vanished almost immediately, replaced by perfect composure, yet the brief glimpse lingered in his thoughts. He found himself watching her longer than intended. Then another guest demanded his attention. The moment passed. But not entirely. Later, as the final visitors prepared for bed, unexpected news swept through the household. Lady Beatrice Hawthorne, the widowed cousin temporarily serving as mistress of Ashcombe House, had taken suddenly ill. A physician was summoned. Servants hurried through corridors once more. Concern replaced celebration. The Duke received the information shortly before retiring. "I trust she will recover quickly," he said. "So do we, Your Grace," replied the butler. "Who will oversee the estate in her absence?" The butler hesitated. A strange expression crossed his face. "The acting mistress of the house will assume responsibility until Lady Beatrice recovers." The Duke accepted the explanation without question. Tomorrow he would meet the woman managing Ashcombe House. Upstairs, Eleanor stood alone in a candlelit chamber, listening as rain tapped softly against the windows. The insult from earlier still echoed in her memory. Yet tomorrow would place her directly before the man who had mistaken her for a servant and never bothered to learn her name. For the first time since his arrival, a quiet uncertainty touched her heart. For the first time since hers, the Duke was about to discover that the lady he had demanded to see had been standing before him all along. Revelation would alter far more than appearances. Morning arrived beneath a pale veil of mist that softened the grounds of Ashcombe House and turned every hedge, fountain, and rose arbor into something dreamlike. The storm had passed, yet its memory lingered in droplets upon the windows. Servants moved quietly through the estate, aware that Lady Beatrice remained confined to her room and that responsibility for the household had shifted elsewhere. The Duke expected to meet the acting mistress after breakfast. Instead, he found Eleanor waiting in the estate office. Ledgers lay open before her. Sunlight touched her sleeve. She appeared calm, though she felt the weight of the moment. The Duke stopped in the doorway. "You?" Eleanor rose gracefully. "Good morning, Your Grace." For several seconds neither spoke. The realization arrived slowly. The woman he had dismissed as a servant now occupied the chair reserved for the person overseeing Ashcombe House. "You manage the estate?" "I do." His gaze sharpened. "Then I owe you an apology." The word surprised them both. Eleanor had expected skepticism. She had not expected immediate accountability. "You owe me nothing," she replied. "I disagree." A faint discomfort crossed his features. "I judged without observing. It was careless." The sincerity unsettled her more than arrogance would have. She thanked him politely and turned the discussion toward estate matters. Together they reviewed tenant concerns, repairs, and charitable obligations. Before long the Duke discovered what numbers alone could not conceal. Eleanor possessed an intelligence both practical and elegant. She knew every field, family, expense, and opportunity for improvement. By the end of the meeting he found himself asking questions merely to hear her answers. The days that followed brought repeated encounters. They discussed harvest yields while walking through dew-covered gardens. Each conversation chipped away at first impressions. The Duke had expected a servant. Then he had expected an employee. Now he found neither description sufficient. Eleanor, meanwhile, struggled against a different danger. Attention. For years she had survived by remaining unnoticed. Attention invited curiosity. Curiosity invited discovery. Discovery invited the return of wounds she had spent years concealing. Yet the Duke noticed everything. He noticed how villagers greeted her warmly. He noticed how nervous servants relaxed in her presence. He noticed that she never spoke cruelly, even when correction was necessary. Most unsettling of all, he noticed when she entered a room. One afternoon Ashcombe hosted a charity gathering for neighboring families. White tents dotted the lawns. Musicians performed near the fountain. Children chased ribbons through the grass while ladies exchanged compliments beneath parasols. Eleanor welcomed guests with practiced composure. The event progressed smoothly until a small accident altered its course. A young girl stumbled near the fountain and dropped a velvet pouch into the water. Without hesitation Eleanor stepped forward. The pouch was recovered, though its contents scattered across the stone edge. Coins rolled away. A miniature portrait slipped free. And among them lay an exquisite bracelet. Eleanor froze. The bracelet consisted of delicate gold links surrounding pale blue sapphires. She knew that bracelet. It had belonged to her mother. Years ago it had vanished alongside countless other possessions during the collapse of her family's fortunes. Before she could reach for it, another hand lifted it gently from the stones. The Duke. His eyes moved from the bracelet to her face. "You recognize it." Eleanor forced herself to remain composed. "It is beautiful." "That is not what I asked." For a moment she considered telling him the truth. Instead she said nothing. The silence answered more than words. The little girl's family soon reclaimed the pouch, But confusion arose when no one could explain how the bracelet had appeared among the contents. Amid the uncertainty, the Duke retained possession of it. As evening approached, guests gathered beneath lanterns strung across the gardens. Music floated through the warm air. Eleanor wandered toward a secluded rose walk. Footsteps sounded behind her. She turned. The Duke approached carrying a small box. "I believe this belongs to you." She stared at him. "It does not." "You looked at it as though your heart stopped." His voice softened. "Take it." He opened the box. The sapphires gleamed beneath lantern light. Eleanor's composure nearly fractured. "I cannot accept something that is not mine." "Then consider it borrowed until the truth is known." She hesitated. The Duke held her gaze. "Some treasures are misplaced by circumstance, Miss Eleanor, but never by worth." The words struck deeper than he intended. Slowly she accepted the bracelet. Unfortunately, they were not alone. Across the gardens, several guests witnessed the exchange. Whispers spread with astonishing speed. By breakfast the following morning, rumors consumed the estate. The Duke had given jewelry to a servant. The Duke had fallen in love beneath his station. Every version grew more outrageous than the last. His aristocratic companions expressed concern. Another warned that public ridicule could damage future alliances. The Duke listened with visible irritation. "She has done nothing dishonorable." "That is hardly the point," one guest replied. "It is precisely the point." The firmness in his voice silenced the table. Elsewhere, Eleanor endured quieter consequences. Women who had previously ignored her now studied her relentlessly. The bracelet felt heavier each hour. Late that afternoon, matters worsened. A distinguished dowager attended tea in the drawing room. While speaking with guests, she noticed the sapphires resting upon Eleanor's wrist. The porcelain cup slipped from her hand. It shattered across the floor. Every head turned. The dowager rose slowly. Her eyes remained fixed on the bracelet. "I know that piece." No one spoke. The old woman stepped closer. "I saw it presented at a ball 20 years ago." The room held its breath. It belonged to Lady Ashcombe. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. The dowager's gaze sharpened. There was only one heir to that collection. Silence deepened. Then came the words capable of changing everything. Only Lady Eleanor Ashcombe could possess such a bracelet. At that exact moment, the Duke entered the drawing room and heard every syllable. Silence settled over the drawing room with a weight greater than any accusation. The dowager's declaration seemed to linger in the air long after the words themselves had faded. Guests exchanged startled glances. Teacups remained suspended halfway to lips. No one wished to miss what might happen next. The Duke stood motionless near the doorway. His gaze moved from the elderly woman to the bracelet and finally to Eleanor. For the first time since arriving at Ashcombe House, uncertainty appeared in his expression. Eleanor maintained her composure, though her pulse hammered against her ribs. Years of discipline prevented any visible crack in her calm exterior. She had survived whispers before. She had survived betrayal. Yet standing beneath the scrutiny of an entire room felt strangely different now. Because his opinion mattered. The realization unsettled her. The dowager cleared her throat. "Perhaps I have spoken out of turn." No one believed it. The moment had already escaped containment. Eleanor inclined her head politely. "You have merely spoken from memory, Lady Winthrop." The older woman continued studying her. "A memory that has suddenly become difficult to ignore." The Duke stepped forward. His voice remained measured. "I believe Miss Eleanor deserves freedom from further speculation." The statement ended the discussion publicly. Privately, it accomplished the opposite. Questions multiplied. By evening, rumors swept through the estate more fiercely than any storm. Some claimed Eleanor was an impostor. Others insisted she was the missing Ashcombe heiress. Every corridor carried fragments of gossip. Every glance seemed sharper. Every silence seemed louder. Eleanor retreated to work, hoping duty would provide refuge. It rarely failed her. Numbers behaved more predictably than people. Ledgers did not speculate. Accounts did not judge. Unfortunately, the Duke was no longer willing to accept appearances. Over the following days he began quietly investigating the mystery surrounding her. He questioned elderly villagers. He reviewed estate records. He examined dates, signatures, and family histories. The deeper he looked, the less sense the official story made. According to documents, Lady Eleanor Ashcombe had vanished years ago. According to nearly everyone who remembered her, she had been intelligent, kind, and deeply devoted to the estate. According to his own observations, those descriptions matched the woman before him perfectly. The contradictions grew impossible to dismiss. Meanwhile, Eleanor noticed his increasing attention. She found him watching thoughtfully during meetings. She caught him studying old portraits in hallways. She sensed questions gathering behind his eyes. Neither addressed them. The tension stretched between them like a violin string drawn steadily tighter. One afternoon, the Duke accompanied an estate visit to a tenant village several miles away. Eleanor joined him to oversee charitable distributions. The journey revealed another side of her character. Children ran toward her without hesitation. Elderly residents greeted her warmly. Farmers spoke her name with affection rather than obligation. The Duke observed every interaction. Respect could be demanded. Affection could not. That distinction mattered. As they prepared to leave, an elderly widow pressed a small basket of flowers into Eleanor's hands. "For everything you've done for us." Emotion flickered briefly across Eleanor's face. The Duke noticed. He noticed everything now. The return journey unfolded beneath darkening skies. Heavy clouds gathered overhead. By the time they reached Ashcombe House, rain lashed the grounds with relentless force. Thunder rolled across the countryside. Servants hurried indoors. The storm swallowed the evening. Later, unable to quiet his thoughts, the Duke wandered through the estate. Candlelight glowed faintly along deserted corridors. Rain battered the windows. Eventually he found himself near the conservatory. A soft light shone within. He stepped inside. The glass structure seemed suspended between earth and sky. Rain streamed down the tall panes. White roses filled the air with fragrance. Candle flames flickered among leaves and shadows. Eleanor stood beside a marble bench. She did not appear surprised to see him. "Your Grace." "Miss Eleanor." For a moment neither spoke. The storm supplied its own conversation. Finally the Duke exhaled. "Who are you?" The question carried neither accusation nor demand. Only honesty. Eleanor lowered her gaze. "I think you already know." "Yes." The word emerged quietly. "I believe I do." The confession removed the last barrier between them. For several seconds she simply listened to the rain. Then she began. She told him about forged documents. About trusted relatives who valued inheritance more than loyalty. About lawyers who preferred convenience to justice. About discovering that truth often mattered less than influence. Her voice remained calm, yet every sentence revealed hidden scars. The Duke listened without interruption. She described surrendering public battle rather than dragging the family name through endless scandal. She described remaining at Ashcombe while watching others control what should have been hers. Most painful of all, she described becoming invisible. "Invisibility is a strange thing," she said softly. "At first it feels like punishment. Eventually it becomes protection." The Duke felt shame settle heavily within him. Because he had contributed to that invisibility. He remembered the day of his arrival. The gloves. The dismissal. The laughter. His expression hardened. Not toward her. Toward himself. "I wronged you." Eleanor looked up. "You did not know." "I should have." The intensity of his answer surprised them both. "You stood directly before me, and I saw only what I expected to see." Something vulnerable passed between them. The storm seemed distant now. The world beyond the conservatory vanished entirely. Eleanor studied him carefully. Beneath the title. Beneath the authority. Beneath the reputation. She glimpsed a man genuinely troubled by his mistakes. That realization softened something inside her. "Survival teaches difficult lessons, Your Grace." Her voice barely rose above the rain. "I discovered that society admires dignity only after it has first destroyed it." The words lingered between them. The Duke absorbed every syllable. "The greatest mistake I have made this season," he said quietly, "was believing I knew who stood before me." Neither looked away. The confession was not romantic. Not openly. Yet it carried an intimacy neither could ignore. The silence that followed felt fragile and precious. For the first time, hope entered the space previously occupied by misunderstanding. The Duke took a small step forward. He intended to say more. Perhaps an apology. Perhaps something deeper. Perhaps the truth he was only beginning to understand himself. Suddenly the conservatory doors burst open. A servant hurried inside, breathless and pale. "Your Grace." The interruption shattered the moment. The servant carried a sealed packet. Rainwater glistened on the envelope. The Duke accepted it immediately. The seal belonged to a London legal firm. A chill passed through Eleanor before the letter was even opened. He broke the seal and unfolded the contents. As his eyes moved across the page, every trace of warmth vanished from his expression. "What is it?" Eleanor asked. The Duke looked up slowly. The storm thundered overhead. "These papers authorize a final claim against Ashcombe House." Her breath caught. He continued. "The man responsible for the fraud intends to seize the estate permanently." The roses trembled beneath another violent gust against the glass. Everything she had sacrificed to protect. Everything she had endured to preserve. Everything connected to her family's name was about to be taken forever. The days following the arrival of the legal papers unfolded beneath a cloud of uncertainty. Ashcombe House remained outwardly magnificent, its chandeliers polished and its gardens immaculate, yet anxiety moved through its corridors like an unseen draft. Servants spoke in hushed voices. Villagers watched the estate with concern. News of the challenge against Eleanor's inheritance spread quickly, gathering speculation wherever it traveled. Eleanor met the threat with the same quiet dignity that had carried her through years of hardship. She reviewed documents. She answered letters. She prepared herself for another public battle she had never sought. Yet beneath her composure lingered exhaustion. The possibility of losing Ashcombe did not frighten her because of wealth. It frightened her because of memory. Every stone in the estate carried echoes of her parents. Every garden path held traces of childhood laughter. Losing Ashcombe would mean surrendering the last physical connection to the life stolen from her. The Duke understood that now. More importantly, he understood her. The woman he had once mistaken for a servant had become impossible to overlook. He spent every available hour gathering evidence. Old records emerged from forgotten archives. Witnesses were located. Correspondence long believed lost resurfaced. Each discovery exposed more of the deception that had robbed Eleanor of her rightful place. Still, powerful enemies remained. Influence had protected the fraud for years. Influence could protect it again. The decisive confrontation would occur during the winter ball in London, where members of the highest circles of society would gather beneath one roof. The invitation arrived like a summons. The challenge would be made publicly. The truth would be tested publicly. The victor would emerge publicly. On the evening of the ball, snow drifted gently through the streets of London. Carriages lined the avenue outside the Grand Harrington Hall. Crystal chandeliers illuminated towering ceilings. Golden light reflected across polished marble floors. Music floated through the air like silk. The aristocracy arrived dressed in jewels, velvet, and confidence. Everyone anticipated scandal. Few anticipated justice. Eleanor entered the ballroom with calm elegance. Her gown shimmered softly beneath the candlelight. Sapphire accents echoed the bracelet that had changed everything. Heads turned immediately. Some recognized her. Others recognized only the rumors surrounding her. Whispers followed her every step. She ignored them. Years earlier those whispers might have broken her. Now they merely reminded her of what she had survived. The Duke arrived moments later. Conversations faltered. Sebastian Fairfax carried the commanding presence of a man who needed no introduction. Yet tonight there was something different about him. Determination sharpened every feature. His eyes found Eleanor almost instantly. The look they exchanged lasted only seconds. It was enough. The evening progressed toward its inevitable collision. Music played. Couples danced. Champagne flowed. Tension grew. At last the architect of Eleanor's suffering made his move. Lord Edmund Ashcombe, the distant cousin responsible for years of deception, stepped forward before a gathering of influential guests. Confidence radiated from him. He had built his life upon the assumption that truth could be buried permanently. "My friends," he announced smoothly, "recent confusion has created unfortunate misunderstandings regarding inheritance and identity." The room quieted. He continued speaking. Every sentence was carefully crafted. Every accusation concealed behind courtesy. By the time he finished, he had painted Eleanor as an opportunist seeking to exploit sympathy and confusion for personal gain. Whispers erupted immediately. The old fears returned. The familiar judgment. The suffocating feeling of standing alone against an entire room. For a brief moment Eleanor felt the weight of history pressing upon her shoulders. Then she remembered something important. She was no longer alone. Lord Edmund turned toward her. "If this lady truly possesses the claim she suggests, let her prove it." The challenge echoed across the ballroom. Silence followed. Eleanor stepped forward. Her heart pounded. Her voice remained steady. "I have spent years proving myself." Some guests looked uncomfortable. Others looked intrigued. But before she could continue, another voice interrupted. "Indeed she has." The Duke crossed the ballroom. Every conversation ceased. Every gaze followed him. His footsteps echoed against marble as he moved directly to Eleanor's side. The gesture alone sent shockwaves through the crowd. Lord Edmund's confidence faltered. The Duke faced the assembled guests. "You ask who this woman is?" His voice carried effortlessly through the room. "I shall answer." No one dared interrupt. He turned slightly toward Eleanor. The admiration in his expression was impossible to miss. "She is the most honorable soul in this room." The declaration struck with the force of thunder. Shock spread across aristocratic faces. The Duke continued. He presented recovered records, original letters, witness statements, financial documents. One by one the pieces fell into place. The deception unraveled publicly. Every forged claim collapsed beneath evidence. Every lie met its contradiction. Every attempt to erase Eleanor's identity failed. The room watched the truth emerge. Not dramatically, not emotionally, irrefutably. Lord Edmund's composure disintegrated. For the first time all evening, fear entered his eyes. When the final witness confirmed the fraud, the outcome became unavoidable. The challenge was defeated. The inheritance restored. The rightful heir recognized. A murmur swept through the ballroom. Then another. Soon the entire room understood the magnitude of what had happened. Lady Eleanor Ashcombe had returned. Not through manipulation. Not through scandal. Through truth. Several guests lowered their eyes in embarrassment. Others rushed to offer congratulations. The same society that had once dismissed her now sought her approval. Eleanor accepted neither revenge nor triumph. Only peace. That choice impressed the Duke more than victory itself. An official declaration was read. Her title was restored. Her rights were restored. Her future was restored. Applause erupted throughout the ballroom. For most people, the story had reached its conclusion. For Sebastian Fairfax, it had only reached its beginning. He looked at Eleanor standing beneath the chandeliers. The woman who had endured humiliation without bitterness. The woman who had suffered injustice without cruelty. The woman who had transformed his understanding of courage. The applause gradually faded. The ballroom settled once more. Guests expected the evening to end. Instead, the Duke stepped forward again. His expression changed. The confidence remained. But something far more personal appeared beside it. The room sensed it immediately. A new silence descended. Different from the earlier silence. Deeper. Anticipatory. The Duke turned toward Eleanor. His eyes never left hers. Then, before the entire aristocracy of London, he opened his mouth to make a declaration so unexpected that it would leave the ballroom breathless and alter both their lives forever. The silence that followed seemed to suspend the entire ballroom between one heartbeat and the next. Hundreds of guests stood beneath glittering chandeliers, yet not a single voice disturbed the moment. The musicians had lowered their instruments. The servants had stopped moving. Even the winter wind beyond the tall windows appeared to hold its breath. At the center of it all stood Eleanor Ashcombe and Sebastian Fairfax. Moments earlier, truth had triumphed. Now something even more dangerous stood waiting. The truth of the heart. The Duke looked at Eleanor as though the crowded ballroom no longer existed. For the first time since she had known him, every barrier had vanished from his expression. No title. No authority. No carefully guarded distance. Only honesty. Eleanor felt her pulse quicken. Throughout the season she had witnessed many versions of Sebastian Fairfax. She had seen the powerful Duke who commanded respect with a glance. She had seen the proud aristocrat who judged too quickly. She had seen the determined man who fought tirelessly to restore her name. Now she was about to see the most vulnerable version of all. The Duke stepped closer. The movement was small. The effect was enormous. Every eye followed him. "Months ago," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the vast hall, "I arrived at Ashcombe House during a storm." A ripple of recognition passed through the audience. Many had heard fragments of that story. None knew its true significance. "I entered believing I understood the world around me. I believed position revealed character. I believed appearances revealed truth." His gaze remained fixed upon Eleanor. "I was mistaken." The words landed with remarkable force because they came from a man rarely associated with public admissions of fault. A murmur moved through the crowd. The Duke continued. "I encountered a woman carrying roses." Eleanor remembered the basket immediately. The scent of white roses seemed to return as vividly as if the moment were happening again. I handed her my gloves. Several guests exchanged curious glances. The Duke's expression darkened with regret. "And then I committed an error I shall remember for the rest of my life." The ballroom grew even quieter. I ordered her to fetch the lady of the house. A few gasps broke the silence. Now everyone understood. Every nobleman, every socialite, every gossip who had spent weeks discussing Eleanor's identity. The Duke allowed the memory to linger. The truth was painfully simple. His eyes softened. The lady of the house had been standing before me all along. The words swept through the room like a wave. Many guests lowered their heads. Others looked toward Eleanor with newfound understanding. The humiliation she had endured was no longer hidden. It stood exposed before society itself. Yet for the first time that memory no longer belonged to her shame. It belonged to his. Sebastian took another step forward. I believed her a servant because I never bothered to look closely. His voice grew steadier. Yet while I overlooked her, she was protecting an estate she loved. He looked around the ballroom. While others spread rumors, she carried herself with dignity. His gaze returned to Eleanor. While society questioned her worth, she continued serving people who depended upon her. Emotion tightened his voice. And while I searched for a lady worthy of admiration, I failed to recognize that I had already found one. The room fell completely still. Eleanor felt unexpected warmth gather behind her eyes. She had spent years imagining justice. She had never imagined this. The Duke turned fully toward her. Nothing else mattered now. Not the audience. Not the chandeliers. Not the expectations of society. Only the woman before him. Lady Eleanor Ashcombe, he said quietly. Her name sounded different in his voice. Not formal. Not ceremonial. Treasured. You taught me something I should have learned long ago. She swallowed carefully. What is that, Your Grace? A faint smile touched his lips. That character reveals rank, not the other way around. A few guests nodded unconsciously. Others appeared deeply uncomfortable. The Duke did not care. For perhaps the first time in his life, public opinion held no power over him. He had spent too many years obeying expectations. Tonight he intended to follow conviction. The next movement stunned the ballroom. Sebastian Fairfax, Duke of Blackthorne, lowered himself to one knee. Gasps erupted from every corner of the hall. A duchess nearly dropped her fan. Several gentlemen stared in disbelief. No one could remember witnessing a duke kneel publicly before anyone, least of all before a woman who had recently been mistaken for a servant. Eleanor herself looked momentarily unable to breathe. The Duke raised his eyes toward hers. There was no embarrassment in his expression, only certainty. If you can forgive a blind man, he said softly, for failing to recognize what was precious when it stood before him, then grant me the privilege of spending the remainder of my life proving I have finally learned. Tears shimmered in Eleanor's eyes. Not because of the proposal. Because of everything behind it. The apology. The respect. The understanding. For years she had endured people who spoke over her, judged her, dismissed her, and misunderstood her. This man was doing the opposite. He was seeing her. Entirely. The ballroom disappeared. The noise disappeared. The years of loneliness seemed to fade like mist beneath sunlight. She looked at the man kneeling before her. The man who had once overlooked her. The man who had chosen to change. The man who had fought for her when retreat would have been easier. The answer became simple. Yes. The word escaped almost as a whisper. It carried farther than any shout. Relief flooded Sebastian's face. Then joy followed. Genuine, unguarded joy. The applause began slowly. One pair of hands. Then another. Soon the entire ballroom erupted. The sound rolled through the hall like thunder. Guests who had once doubted Eleanor now celebrated her. Those who had repeated rumors found themselves cheering for the very woman they had misjudged. The irony was not lost on anyone, especially Eleanor. Yet she felt no desire for revenge. The victory was already complete. The Duke rose and offered his arm. She accepted it. Together they faced the crowd. Not as Duke and Heiress. Not as scandal and controversy. But as two people who had found one another beyond pride, misunderstanding, and social expectation. Months later, spring arrived at Ashcombe House. Winter's snow melted into streams of clear water. Gardens burst into color. Rose bushes bloomed beside winding paths. The estate felt alive again. Villagers celebrated the restoration of their beloved lady. Servants smiled more easily. Laughter returned to rooms that had once felt burdened by uncertainty. One afternoon, Eleanor and Sebastian walked together through the gardens. Sunlight filtered through flowering branches. Birdsong drifted upon the breeze. For a while neither spoke. Comfort had replaced awkwardness. Then Sebastian glanced toward her with amusement. You know, he said, I spent an entire day searching for the lady of the house. Eleanor laughed softly. Yes, Your Grace. I recall that quite clearly. I suspect history will never allow me to forget it. It should not. He smiled. Cruel woman. Observant woman. Their laughter mingled with the sounds of spring. Ahead of them, white roses swayed gently in the sunlight. The same flowers she had carried on the day they met. The same flowers he had failed to see because he was looking for someone else. Sebastian stopped walking. Eleanor turned toward him. For a moment neither spoke. No words were necessary. Everything important had already been said. The greatest irony of all was not that a duke had mistaken a lady for a servant. It was that he had searched an entire house for its mistress while failing to recognize that she was already standing before him. Quiet, steadfast, courageous, and impossible to forget. And in finally seeing her, he found not only the lady he had asked for, but the woman he would love for the rest of his life.